I am Anna, sorry. I'm just getting rid of that Zoom alert. Thank you. Kia ora koutou, Anna McMartin. As Eva said, I'm really happy to be joining you folks today because I love hanging out with sociologists and I don't get to do it enough. So thank you so much for having me. I thought I would take a bit of an informal wander through the questions and tell some stories and I guess share some ideas, and then I would love to have a kōrero with you at the end. Look, I will just kick off. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I'm from Murihiku, from the very south of the south, which is why I have this charming Southland accent. When I was 17, I moved from Murihiku to Otepoti, as a lot of the Southland kids do, where I started university. Now, I had my kids in Dunedin. Eventually, I moved up the Motu and became a public servant. But I really want to initially acknowledge my time in Dunedin. Has anyone worked with the lovely Professor Chris Brickle in their sociological travels, or know of Chris? I'm sure you will do. So I seriously lucked out as a PhD candidate because I got Chris as my main supervisor. So my PhD topic looked at reform to social policy in 1980s and 1990s New Zealand during the period of neoliberal transformation. And I'm a bit embarrassed, but it took me 11 long years between starting and actually walking across the stage and graduating. And Chris was pretty much the best supervisor you could imagine. And in fact, when I went down to graduate, because I was living in Wellington at that point, I remember him helping me carry my suitcases because I was in town for the weekend. And I made this really bad joke about how we'd carried my emotional baggage for 11 years and was now carrying my actual baggage. And although it was a bad joke, it was actually true. He was just a supervisor of the highest caliber academically and just as a good human. So honestly, had I not had him, I don't know that I would have made it across the stage or be able to chat with you now. So I want to acknowledge Professor Chris. So I will tell you a little bit about how has sociology gotten me to where I am today and explaining my career pathway. So I got partway through my thesis. I had my second child. I thought I'll just have a baby and do my PhD at the same time. How hard can that be? I learnt the hard way that is very hard indeed. So a couple of years into my PhD, I really found that I was missing contact with humans. So I decided to go, other than my children, obviously, who are humans. So I decided to go into the workforce. I had a really rough time, though, actually getting a job. I was in Dunedin at the time. There weren't heaps of jobs. It was around the time of the GFC. I didn't have a lot of luck. Eventually, I started applying for public service jobs. And eventually I got in. And once I got in, I did, after some discouraging experiences, I got a role. And after that, I had, I guess, some good luck. I had the opportunity to go and work at Treasury for a couple of years early in my career. And as a sociologist, like I just found it fascinating because, you know, when you're reading about 1980s and 1990s neoliberal transformation in New Zealand, no one has a kind word to say about Treasury, as you probably know. And so there I found myself, and it was a remarkable experience in a lot of ways. I got to see a whole new world. I got to use a whole range of analytical skills. I'm not saying I always liked everything that I worked on, but I had this incredible learning experience as a policy person and also as a sociologist. So in my policy career, I've worked at Treasury, the three big social agencies, which are the Ministries of Education, Social Development and Health. I was at the Ministry for Business, Innovation and Employment for a little while as well, and the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet. And I also did a little stint in Parliament, which I'll talk about later. So I wanted to talk to you about having a patchwork career because I think I realised quite soon on in my policy or public service career that it really stimulated my brain. It appealed to my public service ethics, but there was still other stuff that I loved doing that I couldn't satisfy at work. So along the side, I've done other stuff as well. I'm a writer. I do voluntary work. I've done some lecturing in social policy at Vic, and I've also done a little bit of research on the side as well. One of the loveliest things I've done in the last couple of years is team up with Professor Chris again, and we co-wrote a chapter for a social policy textbook about gender and sexuality and social policy. And I was so chuffed to get to work with Chris again, because I felt like I could hopefully return the 11 years of patience and favours. So I guess that's a little bit about how I got here. At the moment, I work as a consultant for a place called Frank Advice. So mostly I work for the government, but I do a little bit of work for NGOs as well, and a little bit of work developing training courses for people learning policy. And I love all of those things because I get to do such a breadth of stuff and work with a breadth of people. So that's really me in my happy place, I guess. In terms of how I use sociology in my role or my job, something that I think we are super good at as sociologists is working with different types of evidence and also different types of people. So to give you an example, Juliet Gerard, I think she's Professor Gerard, works for the Prime Minister. She's on secondment, I think, from Auckland University, and she's the science advisor to the Prime Minister. And I was listening to her talk the other day about something you'll be really familiar with. She was talking about some people imagine there's this hierarchy of evidence, and the physicists and the mathematicians are up the top because they're the smartest, apparently. And then underneath it, you get the lesser sciences. And down the bottom are us social science guys. We're not rigorous enough. And also in that category, some people would even argue that, for example, Indigenous knowledge and Mātauranga Māori sits in the non-rigorous category. And she was scathing of that view. She was like, it's not a thing, the world has moved on. As policy professionals, we need to be able to grapple with a whole range of evidence. And that's something I think we sociologists are really attuned to and good at. So I think if you're thinking about public service roles, that's something you could play up and, a real strength you could bring. What are the challenges I face in my role? So working in any organisation, especially government organisations or organisations that have a purpose that is somewhat political, there's always challenges with that. And I think sociology gives you both insights and kind of a healthy ability to distance yourself and understand it in a less emotional way. And I'll try and explain what I mean by that. So in 2020, I was working at the Ministry of Health as a policy manager, and I did a stint working in Parliament. I got seconded over to be a private secretary, should I say, in the office of the Minister of Health. And this is a thing that if you're a policy person, it's a great thing to do for your professional development because you learn so much working in the beehive. So bless my heart, I turned up in that role 4 weeks before COVID arrived. And as you can imagine, working in a minister's office can be quite chaotic at the best of times, but suddenly there was chaos that was unprecedented because we didn't know how to do a pandemic, right? We all know the drill now, but this was back in the day before people knew whether it was a good idea to wear masks or not. We were running out of PPE. Global pharmaceutical supplies were getting low. People were trapped overseas. We didn't know who were essential workers. People didn't know how they would get groceries. Homeless people had nowhere to live. It was absolute chaos and no one had the answers. And the year continued in a very challenging fashion. I don't know if you recall, but David Clark, who was the Minister of Health, stepped down. There was new ministers. It was a year of absolute chaos. And for me, it was a resilience challenge, because I guess the neat little person in me, and you guys will be the same, like we're academics, right? We're conscientious. We like to do things really well. We take satisfaction in good work. That was not my world, right? I was scrambling every day. I would have 6 urgent tasks in front of me, and all I could do was choose the one that if I dropped the ball, the consequences would be the least bad. And part of how I got through that was like taking that step back. And this will sound a bit funny, but in another job, I'd worked with a sociologist who, whenever he got down, he reminded himself of disaster sociology and like how to understand situations when they go really wrong. But I found myself looking at the institutions, the structures I was working within, the ethics and values people were bringing, trying to understand it in that sociologist way and getting a little bit of emotional distance from the hard stuff to kind of protect myself. So I guess that was one time in my life where I found a sociological view of the world to be a really helpful thing. So where do I see my role developing? So when I became a consultant, which was about 6 years ago, that was kind of not quite a calculated risk, but it was a step into a slightly new career. And that's kind of at my time in life, to use a horrible phrase, when you're mid-career, that can be quite a scary thing to do. So I took a step into something else. That's paid off for me. So I'm about to start a bigger role as the head of policy at my consultancy, Frank Advice, managing my team. But the thing that helped me, and I'll come back to this a little bit more, is part of my sociologist view of the world is that I'm always interested in how things tick, and I want to know more, and I want more experiences, and I figure out ways I can just learn from anybody and anything. So I'm fortunate that I'm in a workplace where that sort of learning, try your hand at everything, want to know how the world works is really valued. So I would encourage that innate intellectual curiosity and joy of learning that you feel, because it will serve you well at any points in your career in whatever direction your careers take. What do I see as sociology's future in the workforce? Well, I would say this goes back a little bit to that point that Juliet Gerard made about the ability to work with a bunch of evidence. So when I started at Treasury, which was, I don't know, 11 or 12 years ago, whatever it was still a little bit in that mode of back in the day, kind of economists, pretty right wing, not celebrated for their EQ, shall we put it. And that was becoming to be seen as not the whole skill set you can have as a professional anymore. Because if you stick to your one discipline, you've got one view of the world, you've got one explanatory framework for understanding stuff, it limits you. And also, quite possibly, you're not going to be the life of the party, right? You need to get out there as a policy professional. You need to convince people of ideas. You need to put those ideas in motion. You need practical skills. You need to get on with other people. You need to be able to influence them. You don't get to that by hiding in your little disciplinary corner and not engaging with other people or forms of knowledge. So again, I think that's a real strength we have as sociologists. And to give you an example of that, some of my most rewarding and challenging times have been spent working in Māori economic development policy. And that was just such a test of me intellectually, in terms of my leadership skills, in terms of my ability to find courage to step into a world that was not my own and that I needed to understand. And again, you can't do that with your little narrow view of the world. That's, I think, the way policy is going and the way the world is going is that it's getting more complex. We need to be able to deal with a bunch of different kinds of evidence, with arising ethical issues, and a more diverse workforce that we work amongst, or population we serve. So I think as sociologists, we are super well equipped, because that's like a go-to framework. We are outward looking, we are intellectually curious. So in terms of advice I would give to someone who wants to enter my career field, I guess bureaucracies are, well, bureaucratic. They work by particular rules. They have hierarchies, and you enter them as a system component, but you still need to think of yourself as a system shaper, and believe that you can make what is around you better while carrying those neutral values of a public servant. It's a hard road to tread, but it's still it's really important. And I love seeing rangatahi come through who just have so much aspiration for doing stuff better. It's such a joy to me, and that free thinking, and I think the ethical sensibility, I guess, of rangatahi is really cool, and I just want to see them in the public service and rocking that. As I said before, I'm a firm believer in just eat up every kind of experience that comes your way, and be willing to adapt to everything. So something I do, and it's not as cynical as it sounds, is that when I want to learn something or understand something or gain a new skill, I will often find some voluntary work that helps me develop that. It also helps you develop your connections, which are incredibly important for you, both professionally and personally, as you go through your career. I would say as well that, going back to the point I made before, I think just embrace the generational shift of our newcomers into the workforce. I think you guys are awesome. You guys are a little bit older, I think, than my younger son, and I just love the value sets and the energy and the pragmatism and the good sense that comes out of you guys. Bring that with you. I think that's probably about all I have to say, except that if anything I've spoken about has resonated with you, very happy to take questions, but also please reach out to me via my email or my LinkedIn. As you can tell, I'm a Gen Xer who's a bit of a fan of your generation, and I really love encouraging people in their careers, so please reach out. I think that's me.
Thank you so much, Anna. That was really, really interesting. And yeah, claps. Yes, thank you for sharing your experiences and insights with us. I hope that everyone got something out of it. I'm sure, well, I certainly did, so I'm sure that everyone else did. And now we have time for some questions and answers, or a discussion, whatever ends up happening. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to either raise your hand and you can talk to Anna, or message in the chat, or if you'd prefer to be anonymous, you can message me or Nicole directly. But Holly, awesome, take it away.
I have a couple of questions, if that's all right.
Oh no, there's better.
Sorry, I'm at my uni library, so it's probably a bit of like background situation. But I was just wondering, one of the things I was talking about with some other people today was like the idea that certain people go into policy and they become discouraged due to the fact that it's so bureaucratic, and obviously no one can like change the world or change the system by themselves. But that maybe it's frustrating to do so. So I was wondering, like, what would your take be on that? Would you say that like feeling disillusioned or discouraged is something that does happen to people who go into policy?
That's a lovely question. Thank you, Holly. So yes, some people go into policy and their soul dies. I'm not even gonna sugarcoat that. You do work within certain structures, and one of those structures is impartiality. You advise the government of the day. You give your best free and frank advice. They might make a call. That call might be philosophically repugnant to you, but your job is to serve without fear or favour. For some people, they will struggle to reconcile that. Now, I've worked on stuff, and I can say it now because I've left the public service, that I've found extremely difficult. Like, for example, I worked on welfare reform for the previous national government, and while some of it was okay, some of it sat really ill with me, and I'd written basically my whole PhD thesis of it. So sometimes I would basically just like sulk in the corner and what is this? Internally sulk, I should say. How I resolve that internally is that I have a really strong public service ethic, and I'm able to say, okay, don't like it, but I live in a democracy, call's been made, my job is to carry it out. Now, there's very different legitimate ethical positions you can take in regard to that, and there's no right or wrong answer. What I have also found is that I don't necessarily need to be saving the world. Look, I can work on a policy that really resonates with me ethically, or I can work on some objectively boring technical thing. Because I find everything interesting, my intellectual joy will carry me through, even if my heart isn't invested in it, if you know what I mean. So that's something to take into account, I guess, if you're thinking about your own public service career.
Yeah, that's definitely super helpful. Thank you. I mean, I'm thinking about going to policy, so it's nice to hear that there are like kind of ways about not getting discouraged or thinking about it that makes that a little bit less likely.
Completely, yeah. So was that both questions, Holly? I'm not quite sure.
I just saw another hand go up, so I didn't want to like invade. The other question that I had was, I know you mentioned kind of like discouraging experiences, or like maybe entering the policy workforce is quite difficult, and like obviously don't suppose anything you don't want to talk about, but I was wondering kind of what were some of those challenges that you found getting into the industry, and is there anything you found that kind of helped that?
Yeah, so you're entirely welcome to contact me about that. My workplace is we're sort of tossing around ideas about how we might be able to support young people into policy careers. So please feel free to contact me about that. Part of it is there are so many bright young things out there, and this is a crass way to put it. There's so many young people who just have really, really good marks. When you sit with a CV in front of you as a hiring manager, it's really difficult to differentiate because basically everyone is good. So for me, the things become the differentiation points. Now, some people will differentiate themselves, and this is a little bit uncomfortable. Some people have the opportunity to do a bunch of extracurricular stuff, and that reflects their socioeconomic background. So I, as a hiring manager, while I looked at that, I wouldn't make a decision on its basis. For me, I really like to see evidence that people are kind of engaged in the world around them, that they are thinkers. Voluntary work is a great way to express that. So me personally, that's something I will put a real premium on. there's also something to be said, and you have to be careful how you do it, but actually approaching people for mentoring or advice. Now, some people, there's always a risk, right? Some people will be like, I'm so busy, who are you, whippersnapper, just don't bother me. That's always the risk, and that can be quite hurtful. But, there's others, and I'm probably one of them, who will yak happily and give you advice and give you the time of day. So if you can find a safe and friendly person to help you with that, it's great. I got my first policy job. My friend who was already in a policy role helped me, and I remember the night before we were cramming and we were like getting pizza and we were picking it up, and she said, all right, here's how you weigh policy options. Remember, the status quo is always an option. And like, she took me through and I memorized it, and it wasn't like a very deep policy response, but I took it into my interview and I finally got the job. So a bit of help and a bit of coaching can go a long way.
And thank you so much. It's really awesome advice.
Cool.
Thank you for your question, Holly. Casimir, you can, go.
Well, thank you, Anna. It was a wonderful talk. I was just kind of interested, I guess, a lot of the things you referred to, I guess, were very non-linear things. You talked about patchwork, you talked about different experiences, your drive to maintain or get different experiences. In some ways, that is kind of contrasted with the academy vision of careers. When we're at the university, it's almost very linear. You get your degree, you might become a lecturer, senior lecturer, associate professor, professor, retire. So I guess for you, what were some of the drivers? I guess obviously values for you are very important, but could you talk a bit about some of the values that have driven you in your pursuit of the careers and maybe why that was important to you?
That is such a lovely question, which really resonates with me. So I grew up in a kind of maybe old school sort of working class mode of thinking about working life. So I guess I always thought that you leave school, then you pick a thing like nurse or plumber or maybe sociologist, even though I didn't know what that was, and then you just be that thing for 40 years or so, and then you retire. And of course, as I came of age, the economy was changing, and that became less of a thing. It became less of a reasonable expectation. But also I realized I didn't want it. So when I found myself in my policy career, that actually is a little bit similar to academia in that it's like quite defined. There's a hierarchy, there are steps, you move up the steps. So there are some similarities there. But for me, it just wasn't enough intellectually, and it just didn't make my heart happy. So I found kind of complementary ways to do stuff on the side. Like, I know that I'm never going to write for a living and pay the bills, because literally no one does that. But I can do a little bit here and there. Likewise, doing a bit of lecturing, a bit of voluntary work. And I came to think about myself, because when you do that, there's like this hierarchy, right? You think, oh, I've got a real job, and then I do my little hobby things on the side. That's like how we think about work and leisure, if you want to call it that. But I realized that I needed to refuse that. I might only write 5 hours a week, but I'm still a writer. I might only attend a board meeting for the NGO I'm part of for, a couple of hours every month, but I'm still a person with governance skills. So I just chuck that stuff the hell out, I reckon. Just think differently about your career would be my advice. And I'm curious, I'm being a bit nosy now, Casimir, like, have you done the same thing in terms of your sociology on one hand and your grown-up work on the other?
Yeah, I guess I'm just more values-based, I guess kind of yourself. I'm interested in experiences, there's a deep desire for you talk more about this next month, by the way. No, it's just talking about, it's good to be, I think as sociologists, we're not driven often by the tangibles, I think, often, because I hate to break it to you guys, you don't get into sociology for the money and the big paychecks. It's kind of your passion, right? So part of it's your passion project. So for me, it's trying to seek those experiences out that allow you to develop yourself personally. It could be something you have an interest in, or maybe part of your career. You might want to do something differently. So yeah, no, I think you're right. It's just kind of interesting to, I guess, to hear other people talk about that, because often, sometimes you like to think you're unique, aren't you? But we're not really. We're kind of quite similar, I guess.
Great, thank you, Casimir, for your question, and Anna for your response. I'll pass over to Hayley now for your question.
Hey, yeah, thanks, Anna. I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on, like, as in your position, when you've been looking over CVs and such for people to hire, when people don't have the opportunity to do extracurricular activities or voluntary stuff or whatnot, what kind of academic, like, skills you could get from your academic degrees and stuff would you really encourage people to put on their CVs or talk about in interviews to get that position?
So this won't be true of everybody, but as a hiring manager, the ability to think from diverse disciplinary perspectives really appealed to me. And sometimes that can be a little bit hard to show in your CV. Like if you've done, I don't know, a bog standard arts degree like I did, there isn't much in there that would indicate that diversity of thought. That's where you've really got to let your cover letter do the work for you. Because, CVs tend to be a bit sterile by nature. So if in your cover letter, ideally one page, something that doesn't simply repeat what's in your CV is really good. One of the loveliest experiences I had when I was interviewing people for analyst positions, most of whom, hadn't worked before in the public service. Public service interviews follow a very standard format, and which I'd be happy to talk to people about. It's probably an offline conversation. But there's sort of particular questions and particular responses that are expected of them. And the question was, what motivates you at work, I think. And, people often say, I'm really interested in this area, or like I've, a strong public service ethic or whatever. And the young man just spoke effusively about how much he loved his family and how his parents had immigrated from the Pacific when he was a little boy to give him and his siblings some more opportunities. And as he spoke, he was clearly emotional, and it was on one level the wrong answer, but on the other, the most delightful and heartwarming and memorable answer that showed me his values and his commitment, and I melted and he got the job. So, so there you go.
Thank you so much. That's really interesting to hear about, all of those sorts of things and how your individuality and your experiences can be so valuable. So I will pass over to Caitlin for her question now.
Hello again. Sorry, I haven't got my camera on because I've had some technical issues, so you'll just have to stare at a blank screen for a little bit. I was wondering, so it sounds like some of your work has been really intense and quite chaotic. How do you go about balancing sort of family life and work in the policy space? I know in academia, quite often people talk about that being really difficult, like it's quite hard. Academics work a lot, they've got to publish and that sort of thing. Is it similar in the policy space, or is it different? And how do you juggle that?
Look, it's a really good question, and it can be quite dependent on where you are. So every government will sort of come in on a platform of, I want to do big things in this particular area. And obviously those areas where you expect major reform, like for example, the big social ministries, you're more likely to find yourself in a really intense work program. That said, if that is not your thing, there are other agencies around there who have more steady as you go work programs. They don't have the, you know, the major upheavals of politicians wanting to do something majorly different. They might just sort of administer a system in quite an even way without, you know, those major changes. So there is a little bit of a choice there in terms of where you work. I think there has been a change in the public service in the last while, over the last few years, like, for example, National came in what was it, 2008? I can't even remember which year it was, and they retrenched, meaning there were fewer people to do the same amount of work. So that's made policy people's lives on average a bit busier. But where we're really seeing things ramp up is COVID. There's just not enough live bodies to do the work. It's put a lot of strain on people, and I think we've seen a lot of burnout, people deciding it's not for them. So that's I think a good thing to think about if you're considering that as your career. The flip side of that is that all the work is kind of interesting and exciting, and you learn a lot. If that's your bag, you will like this environment. In terms of my own work-life balance stuff, I don't necessarily know that I have had good work-life balance. I wouldn't call myself an outstanding success at that. I have this kind of hyper-focus thing where I get really into my work and I need to complete it and I need to do it well. And some of you guys will have that as well, because yeah, I'm seeing some nodding. It's kind of how we are as, you know, quite conscientious people. Something that has helped me is working from home. It's like this really perverse consequence of COVID. I'm a bit of an introvert, so I quite like being able to shut myself in to the lounge for several hours a day, focus really hard, but be able to also do life stuff like get the washing out and put tea on. So that's been a bit of a counterbalance. I don't know that there is any good answer to that. I think as public servants, people have less control over their work-life balance than they might have a while ago, and that's certainly a factor for you guys to take into account if you're thinking about it.
Thank you, that was really helpful.
Thank you, Caitlin, for your question. I have a question myself. So in the public service, what do you look for and appreciate in your colleagues? Or what makes a person a really good person to work with?
That's a great question. So particularly in my experience when I was working in the beehive and it was so very, very hard, it was a mix of things. Some of those things were about people's technical skills. So if someone wrote like this beautiful bit of advice and I could read it only once, know the key points I needed to pass on to the minister, then beautiful. Because if I have to read something 3 times to get to the point, then that is not a happy outcome for me. So it's a little bit about those technical skills, also about things like being able to judge things like stakeholder mood and risk. Like, for example, you know, I might get advice and I could see that there was this underlying problem, like, oh, these people aren't going to be able to roll out this program on time, or these stakeholders are angry, or, you know, such and such is about to run out of funding, or whatever. And if the person providing the advice wasn't like on top of their game and attuned to that stuff and dealing with it, then that again is like really helpful technical skills to have. So that's the technical side. That stuff is important, but for me, it really comes down to collegiality. So when everyone is like in the firing line as we were at that moment, and it was so intense and so difficult, the person who could be generous in their spirit, like, you know, I would ring them up and it was their 20th frantic phone call in a day and it was 6 p.m. and they would just calmly work through it with me, and we'd figure out what we needed to do. The people who would be kind if I made a mistake and, you know, not snap at me or not make an ill judgment about my competence because I was exhausted, you know. That collegiality and generosity of spirit is super important in work and in life. And from that time, the people I, you know, remember most fondly are the ones who are able to do that.
Thank you so much. Great. And Nicole, I think we might keep this as our last question. Unless anyone has any burning questions, then feel free to raise your hand. But after this question, we might just have to keep it a little bit shorter. Thank you.
Thank you both. That was a great presentation, Anna, so thank you. I have a question that came through in the private chat, but I'm going to add to that question. So if you had your time again at uni, would you do sociology? And adding to that, is there anything else that you wish you had explored, other disciplinary areas that you think would have been beneficial and added to your career path and helped you along that trajectory?
Great question as well. So absolutely, I would do social sciences again, without a shadow of a doubt. I feel like partly because it's really important in its own right, but also because it gives you an appreciation of the importance of other disciplines as well. So like I was saying, you don't want to be that person who retreats into your disciplinary corner. You don't do that as a social scientist, because you know that's not what the world is about. It's kind of trained out of us. So yes, social science again. In addition to that, I wish I'd done a bit of law. I wish I'd done a bit of economics from a sort of practical career perspective and also an interest perspective, but they've not been deal breakers for me at all. What I've done is found opportunities to plug those gaps, not necessarily with formal learning, but I've done stuff like, you know, Coursera courses, or I just, you know, go to seminars or I read, or I just do all those things so I can get a bit of a lay person's grasp of other people's disciplines. My son, who's 20, said something similar to me the other day, like something like, I know I have to be a grown-up and get a job, but I just want to study all the things and do all the degrees. And I gave the same advice to him. There are so many opportunities, you never have to stop learning.
Thanks so much. Great. And I'll just check, does anyone have any last questions for Anna? Nope. Okay, that's all good. We will wrap up our session now. So I'll just give a quick plug for SAANZ, as we are part of the SAANZ organisation. So SAANZ is a non-profit association that aims to promote all things sociology in Aotearoa. With members coming from a range of backgrounds, it is a great place to network with like-minded people, discuss important societal issues, find out about events, and stay up to date with research from New Zealand sociologists. So if you are interested in sociology, or if you are in a similar discipline, SAANZ has a lot to offer, and I would really encourage you to join. Student membership is only $10 a year, and this gives you access to fortnightly newsletters, letting you know about upcoming events and emerging research, as well as access to competitions and scholarships. I think we have a link in the chat. Yes, Hayley has just put a link in the chat. So if you are interested in being a member, you can click that link and it will take you to the membership page. And just in terms of the rest of our seminar series, so next month we will be joined by Dr. Casimir McGregor, and he is with us today, and he alluded to that a little bit earlier. So we are very excited to be hearing from him. He is a senior social scientist and program leader of the Transition to a Zero Carbon Built Environment research program at Brands. So this seminar will be happening on Wednesday, the 4th of May at 4:30, same time, same place, same Zoom link and everything like that. Yes, so can you all please join me in thanking Anna for her time with us today? We really, really appreciate you coming along and informing us and inspiring us.
This has
so
been
much.
such an absolute pleasure. I've enjoyed it so much. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Great.